Welcome back to Ancient Military History, a channel dedicated to providing visual representation of how ancient militaries operated and waged war, going into detail about the real tactics they used to win battles, and showing you, the viewer, how this would have looked in ancient times. In this video, we will be going over the history and tactics used in the Alexandrian Wars, a series of battles that took place in 47 BC. Between the Egyptians at Alexandria and the Romans who were on the side of the soon-to-be dictator, Julius Caesar. In 332 BC, Alexander the Great liberated Egypt from the oppressive control of the Persians, and he assimilated the country into the Macedonian Empire. After his death, the empire was divided, and Alexander's general and personal bodyguard, Ptolemy, became ruler of Egypt, and he founded the Ptolemaic dynasty in 305 BC. The Macedonians ruled over Egypt for the next 3 centuries, until, of course, those pesky Romans came, saw, and conquered. A couple of the last co-regents of the Ptolemaic dynasty were the siblings Cleopatra VII and Ptolemy XIII. In 50 BC, Cleopatra was 18 and Ptolemy was about 11 when their father died, and they rose to power as co-rulers and husband and wife. Cleopatra is described to have been an ambitious, strong-willed, and powerful woman who had become the dominant ruler compared to her much younger and malleable brother. Due to Ptolemy's age, he was in the care of a group of court officials, among them a eunuch named Pothinus and the general Achillas. This closely knit group of officials had influence over the young king, and they feared Cleopatra's growing ambition and power, and they sought to depose her. In 48 BC, Cleopatra fled to Syria, and she returned with an army and every intention to reclaim her throne. While Egypt was on the brink of a civil war, Rome was in the middle of theirs. 2 Roman generals, Pompey the Great and Julius Caesar, had just fought at Pharsalus, and Pompey fled to Egypt, hoping to secure an auxiliary force from Ptolemy, calling upon the good relations he formerly had with Ptolemy's father. As Pompey awaited a response on the Egyptian coast, Ptolemy's clique of court officials plotted his demise. Caesar was clearly winning the war for Rome, so in an effort to make an alliance with him, the group pretended to welcome Pompey, and they personally escorted him from his ship. The conspirators murdered him before he could set foot on the shore. Caesar, in pursuit of Pompey, followed him to Egypt, only to be greeted with the latter's severed head and insignia ring. He wept bitterly for his deceased son-in-law, and vehemently expressed his disgust with the actions of the conspirators. After mourning, or perhaps pretending to mourn, the loss of his nemesis, Caesar occupied the palace at Alexandria and took it upon himself to negotiate peace between the warring siblings, possibly because their dispute would consequently affect Rome, or perhaps their reconciliation would allow him to collect repayment for the debts incurred by their father, who had borrowed huge sums of money from Rome so he could retain his throne. Caesar thus summoned the siblings so they could settle their dispute legally, and with Caesar acting as judge. While Ptolemy traveled to Caesar with one of his advisors, Pothinus, Cleopatra took a different approach. She realized that in order to regain her throne, she would need Caesar's support. In a captivating display to entice the Roman commander, and without the restrictions of court formalities, she smuggled herself into the palace to privately meet with Caesar, and he succumbed to her boldness and charm. He thus helped her reconcile with her brother, and they once again became co-regents over Egypt, however briefly. The court officials, who profoundly opposed Cleopatra, had once again conspired, this time to assassinate Caesar. Upon discovering their plot, Caesar had Pothinus executed and Ptolemy detained. The general Achillas escaped, swayed the Egyptians to his side, and raised an army of about 20,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalry. Furthermore, he had 72 warships in the harbor. And so began the siege of Alexandria. Caesar, who had only brought 3,200 infantry, 800 cavalry, and 10 warships with him on his sojourn to Egypt, sent out messages ordering his allies to send reinforcements. But in the meantime, he found himself in a desperate situation. he was able to secure the palace and nearby harbor. But Achillas took control of the rest of the city and surrounding seas. Frequent minor skirmishes in the city ensued by day and by night, and many buildings and storehouses were set ablaze. The Egyptians attempted to secure the port in order to regain control of their warships that were in the harbor, and thereby cut off Caesar's supply and potential escape. Caesar, knowing his small forces wouldn't be able to protect the harbor for long, wittingly burned all the Egyptian warships. Unfortunately, the fire couldn't be contained at the docks, and it spread as far as the Library of Alexandria, which was the ancient world's single greatest archive of knowledge. While these events were taking place, Arsinoe, sister of Cleopatra and Ptolemy, snuck out of the palace, had Achillas put to death, and she and her servant Ganymedes took control over the Egyptian army. With Caesar's forces still besieged at the palace, Arsinoe's forces dammed up the canals and cut off the Roman water supply, which had demoralized Caesar's men until he had them dig up freshwater wells. In response to Caesar's call for aid, Roman reinforcements arrived by sea, increasing Caesar's fleet to 34 warships. Furthermore, King Mithridates of Pergamum, and loyal ally of Caesar's, marched his army of about 20,000 men from Syria to Egypt. The Egyptians decided to equip a new fleet. They gathered all the ships stationed at the mouths of the Nile River and a nearby lake. In total, they were able to amass a force of 27 warships and a contingent of smaller ships. And so began the naval battle at Alexandria. On the west side of the city, Caesar placed 9 Rhodian galleys on his right and 8 Pontian galleys on his left, separating the 2 wings with a gap. He kept the remaining 17 ships in the rear as a reserve. Across an area of shallow water, the Egyptians placed 22 quadriremes in the front row and the remaining 5 quinquiremes in smaller ships in the rear. Both sides then waited for the other to make the first move. Eventually, Caesar's commander on his right wing volunteered to lead his ships through the shallows. The battle began after the first 4 ships got through and the rest of the fleet engaged. The battle turned into a naval melee and ended as a Roman victory. Caesar's next plan was to seize the Pharaoh's Island and thereby gain full control of the harbor. He led a small contingent of light infantry and cavalry on small boats, while his main forces served as a distraction by attacking the island elsewhere. Caesar successfully slayed the inhabitants of the island and captured 1 castle, but when the mainlanders saw this, they engaged the Romans on the mole and forced them back onto their ships. Caesar's own ship was so overcrowded with retreating Romans that the ship sank, and Caesar, barely escaping with his life, had to swim to another boat. It is said that he had to swim as many as 200 paces, and Caesar was thus unsuccessful in his attempt to control the island. The 2 armies were at a stalemate, with neither side able to gain the upper hand. While Caesar was fighting in Alexandria, King Mithridates and his men successfully captured Pelusium on the far east side of the Egyptian territory. Any other Egyptians who attempted to engage the Pergamenians were destroyed as well, and Mithridates continued a slow advance towards Alexandria. But the Egyptians would not end the war even then. Dissatisfied with Arsinoe's leadership, and thinking they would have a more superior army with Ptolemy by their side, they offered Arsinoe in exchange for their king. Some sources state that Caesar agreed to the trade because it would be better for his reputation to defeat a king, rather than the king's sister. While other sources state that the Egyptian army asked Caesar to release Ptolemy under the pretenses that they would form an alliance with Caesar against Arsinoe. Whatever his reasons, Caesar agreed to trade Ptolemy for his sister, and Ptolemy consequently assumed command over the opposing forces and resumed the war. The young king and the Egyptians wasted no time to set out against the Roman forces. However, with very little tactical experience and without his prominent advisors Pothinus and Achillas, the 15-year-old Ptolemy was at a great disadvantage up against 2 experienced military leaders, one of whom was renowned for conquering and subduing all of Gaul. Ptolemy first sent a large force to try to block Mithridates, who was on his way from Pelusium. Mithridates had adopted Roman military customs, and he had built a fortified camp on the eastern side of one of the branches of the Nile. Ptolemy's troops crossed the river in several groups. The first group across attacked his camp, but without success. And when it became clear that the Egyptians were disorganized, Mithridates attacked and routed them. The survivors recrossed the Nile and prepared for a second attack. News of this first engagement soon reached Caesar and Ptolemy. Both men decided to leave Alexandria to take part in the upcoming battle in the Delta. Ptolemy was able to use the branches of the Nile to reach the camp of his defeated troops, while Caesar sailed along the coast. Although Ptolemy had the easier route, Caesar was able to arrive in time before Mithridates could be attacked. And once Caesar had joined Mithridates, they began the final battle for control of Egypt, the Battle of the Nile. They advanced towards Ptolemy's camp, which was on the far side of a branch of the Nile. Ptolemy sent his cavalry and some of his light infantry to defend the line of the river. For some time, they were able to stop the Roman forces, but eventually some of Caesar's German cavalry managed to swim the river, while the legionaries built a simple bridge using some tall trees. The Egyptians attempted to escape to Ptolemy's camp, but most were killed during the pursuit. Caesar pursued closely, hoping that his arrival would convince the Egyptians to surrender or flee. Instead, he found them in a secure position in a strongly fortified camp, and he decided not to risk an immediate attack. The main Egyptian camp was built on a hill close to the Nile. It was linked to a nearby fortified village by a line of communications. They also had a fleet on the Nile. On the following day, Caesar decided to attack that village with his entire army, in the hope that he would be able to follow its retreating garrison into the main camp. The village fell as planned, but the second part of the plan failed, and Caesar's men came to a halt at some distance from Ptolemy's camp. He then attempted to attack on two sides, from the plains and along the gap between the camp and the Nile, but again, his plan failed. However, during this fighting, most of the Egyptians moved to the parts of the camp that were under attack, leaving the tallest part of the hill undefended. Caesar sent a small force to attack this part of the camp, and they were soon able to overwhelm the few defenders who had been left there. Once the Romans had broken into the camp in that place, its defenders became demoralized, allowing the Romans to break in at several other places. The Egyptians attempted to flee, but many were crushed in the ditch that surrounded the camp, while others were drowned in the river. Ptolemy and some others tried in their haste to escape across the river, but his ship was so filled with retreating Egyptians that it too sank due to being overcrowded. However, unlike Caesar, who was able to swim to safety, the young king Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile River. After a clear Roman victory, Caesar was left with undisputed control over Egypt, and he placed the now 22-year-old Cleopatra on the throne with her other and much younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, who was about 11 or 12 at the time, and together they co-ruled Egypt until his mysterious death just a few years later. As for Caesar, he dallied with Cleopatra for a few more months, and when his holiday in Egypt came to an end, he resumed his engagement in the Roman Civil War. Thank you for watching Ancient Military History, your go-to resource for the strategies and tactics used by ancient militaries throughout history to conquer their foes. We are a brand new channel, and your support would mean the world to us. So, if you liked this video and would like to see more, subscribe to the channel and check out our playlists, where we cover the tactics in other interesting ancient battles. Also, let us know in the comments which ancient military battle you'd like to see next. Until next time, thank you and have a wonderful day.